When Janet Kavanagh's husband deprived her and their 3 young children of a home and food, the woman had only one place to go, her mother's former country home. But when she got there, something surprising from the past awaited her. The car swayed at every curve on the dirt road. It was the summer season, and the Kavanagh family had hit the road to a small town in the countryside. There wasn't much urban infrastructure there, but the landscapes were breathtaking. There are lots of greenery and lush lakes along the way. Janet knew the place well and was surprised to find that the roads had changed little over the years. In the back seat, her 3 children slept, not paying much attention to what was passing by the window. Everyone was very tired, not only from the trip but from everything they had experienced in the last few months. Janet drove the rental car, holding back tears the entire way. It had been months since the woman had been able to keep her head straight with the help of medication. She just hoped to God that her children didn't realize how desperate she was. Then Janet pulled into a driveway. "Here we go, Rick, Nate, and Milla. This is it," the mother announced, capturing the attention of the 3 of them again. The house that was right in front of them was old and looked abandoned. The weeds were a little high, and there were wildflowers growing everywhere, making it clear that nature was in charge of beautifying the place since there wasn't a person who had done that in recent months. "It looks like a house from a horror movie, Mom," Rick commented. "Oh, how scary," Milla reacted, taking a step back. Janet knew the place wouldn't appeal to young people right away, but she hoped they would understand the importance of the property. "It's temporary, okay? Let's figure it out," said the mother, already closing the car, picking up the bags, and heading towards the door. Despite the fear, the children got ahead and ran around the place. Curiosity and all that space for adventure were instigating, and that was exactly what Janet was betting on to entertain her children after the horrors they had gone through. Once through the old fence, Janet spotted the old mailbox on the property. Looking at it brought back many good and surprising memories of her childhood. Rick, the eldest son, was looking into the house and how much it seemed to have been forgotten over time. Nate and Milla, the 2 youngest, were picking flowers and looking for bugs. "Look, a bee," shouted Nate. "There's another one here too," replied Milla. Nate and Milla looked dazzled, and that gave faith to Janet's plans. If Matthew hadn't been so irresponsible, we wouldn't be here now, in the middle of nowhere and penniless, but that's life, she thought. He lifted his head and accepted the burden he carried, knowing that the breakup was necessary and that it was in the best interests of the children. 10 years of marriage had been very intense. Janet was 23 when she met Matthew. He was a very responsible and successful businessman. "I stayed late at the office if necessary or used part of the weekend to advance spreadsheets and payments." But even after getting stressed out with some office work, the man would sit next to her at night, pop open a beer or whiskey, and then relax. It gave her security. It seemed that Matthew managed to balance his life. Their courtship lasted 2 years, during which time she also managed to establish herself professionally. They weren't rich or millionaires, but they had enviable incomes in their circle of friends and family. When everything seemed stable, they got married. At the end of the party, Matthew fulfilled the promise he had made to the firm's employees. Each would take a liter of whiskey as a souvenir. It was the groom's favorite drink and also demonstrated how well his business was going. This somewhat wasteful profile began to attract very important people to him, but with habits that would influence Matthew in a harmful way. Matthew was already making small bets in casinos and gambling when Rick, their first child, was born. When he lost, he got frustrated, but he always said it was a paltry amount. And when he won, which was rare, he told everyone at the office and in the family how he had a gift for predicting the results. By the time Milla, his youngest daughter, was born, he had already become a high roller. He was putting large sums of money at stake, which began to worry Janet. She sometimes quarreled with her husband about this, but he said the family's finances were fine because he knew what he was doing and was a responsible man. Janet was afraid, but it didn't take away Matthew's reason. After all, there was never anything missing for the children and the couple at home. Also, he continued to wake up early every day and work hard at work. "Betting is my hobby. It's entertainment for me to relax, my dear," he would say. "I may lose a few bucks, but when I get it right, it will be good for everyone." The fact is that if he had known that such a habit would destroy his family, maybe he would have listened to his wife. Miss Phyllis, Janet's mother, knew about Matthew's bets and thought that they could not end well. Mrs. Phyllis feared that a tragedy would occur, affecting both her daughter and her grandchildren. On the one hand, she didn't have much of an opinion. After all, the money belonged to her son-in-law. "What are you going to do if one day he loses everything, my daughter? Are you going to support him with our family money?" she once asked Janet. "He will not lose everything. The bet money is not the money that keeps this family going, Mom," she replied. Miss Phyllis then said she prayed she was right. In one of his games, Matthew bet big and ended up winning the jackpot back. To prove to everyone that it was just a hobby and that he had it under control, he used the prize money to take the whole family to Disney. There were 4 enchanted days for Janet, Rick, Nate, and Milla, who were still very young. If her husband made such a surprise for them, then it must be true that the finances of the business and personal lives were shielded, Janet thought. The problem is that after winning that jackpot, Matthew felt even more confident and started betting higher and higher. After all, the more money you risk, the greater the reward. But Matthew never won again. On the contrary, he lost several times in a row, always thinking that the next time he would be able to make up for the previous loss. His losses reached the point where he had to take a huge sum of money out of the company itself. He had to fire 8 senior officials at once and announce an emergency restructuring in order not to have to publicly admit that his gambling addiction led him to bet even what he didn't have. In order to pay the bills at home, Matthew had to sell his entire share in the company to his partner, making him no longer one of the owners. From that moment on, he was on the street. This was a huge blow to his self-esteem and, of course, to his family's life as well. Janet was desolate. After all, where would they go from there? How would they pay the tuition for the 3 children to continue studying? But the worst was yet to come. A loan shark started calling the family home, collecting the loans the man had taken out. When Janet tried to finish the month's groceries at the supermarket, she realized that the family's credit cards had been blocked. She called the bank and was informed by the manager that the couple's finances had been completely exhausted by her husband, and more than that, he had received loans from the bank over the last few months, and the hole was so big that, if the debt was not paid, a bailiff would soon be knocking at the family's door. In other words, what the family owed the financial institution was close to the value of the house they lived in, and the house would be put up for auction to pay off everything. Janet heard that and went airborne. It was as if the world around her had stopped. She didn't understand how her husband could have been so irresponsible and selfish while secretly accumulating debt. When she found her husband later, her lethargic state gave way to fury, and Janet was out of control. "Do you realize the seriousness of what you've done? Your prank cost our family's financial health, Matthew. We're going to be evicted, and we have 3 kids to feed, all because of a stupid game." Janet didn't accept what he said. "What? Are you thinking about playing again? It's over. You understand, if you don't promise me that right now, I'll take the kids and disappear." Matthew saw that Janet was serious and lowered his head. He was silent for a few seconds and then promised to change his ways, but begged his wife to support him and not leave. The next day, Janet put the family home up for sale. She wanted to sell it before it was auctioned. That way, he could get a better price for her, allowing him to pay off the bank debt, but only a portion of what her husband owed to the loan shark, who called the family numbers every other day. She looked around the rooms and thought of the children. Where are we going to live now? Janet took a deep breath and told her mother, Miss Phyllis, what had happened. She was dying of shame and wanted to disappear from the face of the earth. Never thought it would get this low. He asked to access the family's money to pay the loan shark. The elderly woman looked coldly at her daughter and asked, "Are you sure about this, my daughter? If I give you that money, I will have nothing left for your future and that of my grandchildren, apart from our old house in the countryside with that mailbox that you loved, remember?" said the elderly woman. Janet couldn't forget about the mailbox. As a child, Janet always wanted to be the first to open it and rush the mail home. Sometimes Miss Phyllis would put candy in the box just so Janet would have the pleasure of finding a surprise inside. But it wasn't time to remember the past. Janet had to worry about her family's future, so she confirmed that she wanted to use the family funds to help her husband. After all, he was a member of her family as well. Upset, Donna Phyllis thought about her 3 grandchildren and finally agreed to transfer everything she had saved during her life. If not for her, Matthew would have been in trouble with the loan shark, and his grandchildren would have had nowhere to live. The transfer was Miss Phyllis's last good deed in life. 40 days later, she suffered a sudden illness and had to be hospitalized in a hurry. He died in the ICU, and Janet was devastated. She cried for hours after the funeral. Not even her children could make her feel better. A week later, the family lawyer delivered a letter from Miss Phyllis to Janet. He explained that the rest of Miss Phyllis's possessions were in the letter. Janet didn't understand what that meant. Upon opening the envelope, Janet found a plain sheet of paper with handwritten lettering. It was her mother wishing her the best, telling her that the house where she had grown up, in the countryside, should be her refuge when needed. "May you only receive letters of happiness," she finished the text. The key to the place was in the envelope. Matthew stopped playing. He lost friends, and a good part of his family saw him with a certain contempt. He, Janet, and the 3 children had to leave the beautiful house they owned to live on rent in a tiny apartment. Without their previous income, the 3 children had to drop out of private school, but no public school could accept them in the middle of the school year. So the kids would stay all day in the apartment, bored and picking fights with each other. From that moment on, Janet would look at her husband more rigidly. He needed to be better for his family and find a way to regain his dignity, but the truth is that sadness fell on Matthew after everything he caused, and this opened the door for him to rediscover an old best friend, whiskey. The man continued to wake up early every day and go to the street in search of a job or some odd job. His former partner, who was a good man, understood that everyone makes mistakes in life and made Matthew a promise: if he proved he was better, he could have a place in the company again. Not as a partner but as a senior employee. After all, Matthew understood that business like few others. That gave Janet hope, but when Matthew came home, the first thing he looked for was a bottle. Sometimes, on quieter days, he would sleep drunk on the couch. But he was getting lost fast. When her former partner threw a birthday party for their son, who was the same age as Nate, Janet saw it as a golden opportunity for her husband to prove he was ready. While the children played in the garden, the parents chatted in a very lively way. Many of the adults present were Matthew's former employees at the company, and the situation was a little embarrassing for him. Matthew got carried away and downed a few more beer bottles. The more drunk he got, the more unpleasant he was with the other children's parents and with his own wife. When everyone was already realizing that the man had passed the point, Janet tried to convince him to withdraw before he ruined the last chance he had with his former partner. "Honey, let's go home. You need a shower and a good night's sleep." "Come on, I'll help you," she suggested. But he told Janet to shut up and said he wasn't going to do what she wanted, drawing everyone's attention. "You think just because you helped me once you're going to boss me around now? Remember, you ungrateful, I was the one who supported you until yesterday," he said aloud to everyone. The woman didn't know where to stick her face. The guests were embarrassed, and Matthew's former partner gave him a disappointed and even sad look. It was the biggest embarrassment of Janet's life. She was devastated. Back in the small apartment they lived in, she tried to go over her whole life in her head and understand how she had let it get so far. Sad and angry, she had no choice but to separate from her husband. Matthew was sinking his life in the mud, and the 3 children did not deserve to sink with it. When the divorce papers arrived, it was as if Matthew had already been waiting for them. At the ceremony, the man signed the paperwork as if he were the one getting rid of a problem. It only left Janet to take the children and go inland to her family's old house, and there she would think about how to conduct the rest of her life. Her life. She was breaking, and I didn't even know if the electricity was still on in the house, but there was no other way out. She told the kids this was a temporary move, like they were going away for summer vacation, but she didn't have a plan B in mind. Apart from the house, Janet had nothing. Your account was almost empty. The little she had in the bank would help her live only a few months. I would have to find a new job and hope for the best. Janet walked in through the front door, which creaked open, sending a chill through Rick. "This house looks haunted," said the boy. The place was very dark, and Milla didn't want to go in at all. Janet still remembered how certain things worked there and tried to go to the wide window in the room. It was a little stuck, but as soon as he managed to open it, a very strong beam of light entered the house and bathed everything in a golden light, making the children's mother plunge into nostalgia. Suddenly, the sound of breaking glass came from the room. "Mom, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to," Milla shouted from the living room. Janet and the boys went to see what had happened. In the living room, a huge framed glass painting was shattering on the floor. "Look, there's a little door attached to the wall," the youngest said. When Janet saw what it was, she nearly fell to her knees on the floor. "It's not a little door, silly. That's a safe right there," said Rick, the oldest. Now Janet understood why that old painting had always been in the same place. It hid a safe. Janet tried every way to pull the door open, but concluded that only a specific key could open it. Where was the key to that safe? She was looking out the window when her eyes suddenly found the old mailbox at the entrance of the house, which reminded her of the last conversation she had with her mother, when the old woman mentioned the mailbox in a curious way. But is it possible, she thought. Janet went to the front of the old house and checked the mailbox, the place where she had found sweets hidden by her mother several times. When she opened it, she saw that there was another surprise waiting for her. A key, as old as the house, and much heavier than it looked. She ran back into the room and put the key in the lock. As he twisted it, he heard a sharp click, and then the vault door opened. Janet expected to find old photos, letters exchanged between her parents, and maybe old family documents, but what she found inside left her speechless. Inside a case were gold rings and necklaces, silver earrings, and a huge, heavy gold pendant studded with very bright stones. When opening the pendant, Janet saw on one side that there was a picture of her when she was still a baby, and on the other, the inscription, "To Janet, forever my most precious treasure." As she read it, it was as if Donna Phyllis were beside her, back in that old house, to enunciate that sentence herself. Janet held the diamond-studded pendant close to her heart and began to cry. She was too emotional with what it evoked in her and what it meant in her life at that moment. She started sobbing. "What is it, Mom? Is everything all right?" Milla asked. She turned and opened her arms to her children, inviting them all to hug her. "It's better than ever, my daughter. I just realized how Grandma always loved us." The next day, Janet took all of Miss Phyllis's old and valuable jewelry out of the safe and went to estimate how much they were worth. More. He looked out the window and saw Rick, Nate, and Milla playing among the wildflowers. The sun was going down, and everyone had reason to smile now. Well, I hope you enjoyed this incredible story. Don't forget to watch the suggested video and share this stories with some friend. See you in the following video.